So welcome back to the podcast that no one listens to, and even you're having doubts about. I'm joined this week by the loveliest libertarian you ever blocked on Twitter, Free Caledonia. Yo. And the genius behind Malcolm Tucker, Tucker 5 Law.
Hello.
And before we get started, actually, I have got a few Tucker-specific questions.
Okay.
So recently on Twitter, I noticed that within the boomer-zoomer end of the Scottish independence, inverted commas, movement, there are people that are now spouting very blood and soil nationalist views, suggesting that if you weren't born in Scotland, you shouldn't get a vote in Indy Ref 2. I just wondered, do you have any views on that?
Yes, those people are arseholes. So I've said before, that 10 to 15% of any given population will be arseholes, and that you can't judge the others. What we've got there is the arsehole phenomenon, and it moves through all regions and nations and religions and creeds. It's just that solid block of people who will just be twats, and they could fuck off, quite frankly. I chose Scotland. I'm like the adopted child. Do you know what I mean? I'm special. You can fuck off. Scotland's mine.
The other one I noticed, which is kind of in the same ballpark, was International Women's Day came and went recently, and you put out from Malcolm some very lovely tweets about it. Comment section was a fucking riot though, wasn't it?
It was brilliant. It was absolutely fucking brilliant. I took such joy, yeah. It was the incel army coming out to inform me that I probably have to beg fat women for sex.
That was the tweet. That was the tweet that I read.
I'll share with you that it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd just gotten up because that's what time I get up, and I was sat on the toilet reading that. Which is fortunate, because if I hadn't already been pissing myself, I would have been pissing myself. And you just read things, and because obviously I'm a girl, I am married to a man, and it just doesn't occur to these idiots that what they see might not be what they've actually got.
I don't know where they're coming from. Do they think Malcolm Tucker is a real person? It's like a real guy. Are they tweeting that, or do they think the person doing that account is a bloke and they just assume?
They just assume that it's a bloke. They just assume that it's a bloke doing it because it's a bloke.
Because they're sexist, obviously.
Because they've got no fucking imagination. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask about that because I just thought like two things back to back.
I found it absolutely hysterical. I did find it absolutely hysterical.
But it's also to come back to the Scottish independence one, that a lot of the people that were basically saying English shouldn't get a vote in Indy Ref 2 follow you on Twitter, not realising that you're English. So I just thought all this was like fucking hell, but yeah, it just goes to show you, just be something a bit opposite online, and everyone will just assume, that is who you are.
It's just like that sort of 1950s radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. It doesn't occur to people to actually think beyond what it is that they're getting.
So this is question time, but better, on the Angry Scotland podcast. Our first question is from John, who says, the SNP have been in government in Scotland for over 10 years. The Westminster government and opposition are in utter chaos. Support for independence has never been higher. If the SNP can't deliver independence now, will they ever be able to?
I feel that there's a sort of a bit of a chippy edge to that question, if I'm honest. Why weren't the SNP giving us a referendum? Because
I did read it in that voice. I'm not saying that's actually what John
I know. I read
like.
that question.
Sorry, John.
I read that question. I'm very sorry if it wasn't meant to be chippy. Then I apologise. But it came across as fucking chippy, so that's how I'm answering it.
To be fair, I read it that way because that's how I thought it came across as well.
Yeah. So yeah, you know who you are. You know what you did. But the truth of the matter is that the SNP aren't in the position to be able to give us a referendum without permission from Westminster. Literally, we could end up in the situation like Catalan where we're trying to hold a referendum and it's illegal. I don't personally want soldiers in the streets. I don't want this ending up like the Ireland problem. I don't want any of those things. I want this to be handled in a civil manner. It used to be the SNP policy that if they got a majority at Westminster that they would declare UDI. But now we've gone down the referendum route. It's going to have to be a referendum, and that is unfortunately going to have to be with Westminster permission, which means probably we're going to need a weak Labour government that needs the SNP votes temporarily, and the bargaining chip will be independence. That's not going to happen anytime soon, I'm afraid. Or a change of Conservative leader, but that's not going to happen until the fucking Brexit shambles has been sorted out. Theresa May's not going to give us one. If we try and force the issue, we'll have to take it to the Supreme Court, potentially. There's no guarantee that that'll fall out the way we would want it to. So I think Nicola Sturgeon is towing a cautious line, understandably, because she doesn't want us to end up like Catalonia. I want a referendum. I want a referendum that we can win. I feel that we'll start from a strong position and there'll be people that will be persuaded just like there were last time. Then it'll gather its own momentum and like a nice long period for it to run just like we had last time so that it could be properly discussed. But what I really, really don't want is soldiers in the streets. I don't want grannies getting hit in the face. I don't want people getting shot. I don't want civil unrest. I don't want any of those things. I want a peaceful civil process. And if we start behaving illegally, we will run the risk of facing consequences of that serve nobody. Just before that last surprise general election, Nicola Sturgeon had actually come forward and asked for a second independence referendum and had been flatly told no. Now was not the time by Theresa May, because as it turns out, Theresa May was planning on holding a general election that she was denying she was about to hold. But I think that up until that point, Sturgeon had assumed that when it was asked for, it would be given. Because I think she still thought, in much the same way that I think Alex Salmond erroneously thought, that the other side would play with a straight bat. But they're not. They're not going to. And it needs to be understood that irrespective of whether or not we've got a mandate for it, which we have, they're not going to fucking let us have one. Theresa May is not going to let us have an independence referendum. She's not. And that's wrong. But it is the case. It is the reality. And fucking pissing and moaning about it isn't going to make any difference. And we need to behave strategically. And fucking throwing stones at our own side because they won't do something stupid isn't the answer.
The most important thing that we can focus on now is building the strongest possible relationship with the European Union.
Absolutely.
Because no matter how this goes down, on the back of everything you've just said, we're going to need backup. And that is where it's going to come from.
Yep.
So that should be the focus. The Yes supporters should be focusing on pro-Europe, pro-immigration, separating our policy and worldview from Westminster. Yep. The SNP is a globalist party. Deal with it. It's a globalised world now. That's what they want to be involved in. That's what we want to be a part of as well. That should be the focus. Scottish independence is a consequence of those choices. The cart before the horse with this is that if we keep going independence, 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 all of that positive stuff gets lost. Independence is the result of that thinking. That's the after bit. The focus we have to have at the moment is on the European stuff. These people that do constantly bang on about independence because they know they'll get likes and shares. The problem with their mentality is, though, it's liked and shared by a very small circle.
It's an echo chamber.
Exactly. So it never goes outside. So you're not convincing or winning anybody over. But I believe the reason why they're doing it is because it makes them feel important. It gives them a sense of people are listening to me, but you're not convincing anybody. You're not reaching out to the wide platform of Scotland. You've got 200 retweets there on that tweet that says, I wish Scotland was independent, whatever. But those are the same 200 people that
you already agree with.
I've already agreed.
Yeah.
You know, you're not changing anyone's mind. The skill is to reach out beyond, and the ability to reach out beyond is based on being pro-European, riding the Remain wave that's now building across the UK and across Scotland, this attitude of Brexit's a fucking nightmare, Remain was the right way to go. We should be looking to utilise that and surf it like a wave, and then people go, wow, this Twitter or this Facebook's content is really good about immigration issues, it's really good about this, And then you dig a little deeper. Oh, and they're for Scottish independence. But how could such a reasonable person be for Scottish independence? And suddenly, there you go. What doesn't work is if you're just fucking screaming, "Indie 2!" Because then you just look like a dog fucking a football.
I don't believe that anybody ever changes their mind based on kind of social media stuff. People will change their mind based on their own experiences and conversations that they might be having with friends and family. What the social media stuff is useful for is for circulating arguments amongst ourselves, and that's great. So that if I know a fact that is useful for persuading people, I share that fact with the people that agree with me so that they all know that fact, so that when they're having that conversation in the small room with the person that's undecided, they can give them that fact that might sway that person, but nobody's going to take that in over Twitter.
I think that follow on from it, and it's a criticism that I think we've all gotten on Twitter, and the podcast has, this idea that playing nice won't win us Scottish independence. I vehemently disagree with this opinion.
I absolutely disagree.
The reason why I disagree with it is that if you are a nice, courteous, hard-working person in your office, someone that people like, you're seen to be intelligent, you're seen to be reasonable, and then if they find out, wow, that person's a yes supporter, they're much more likely to listen to you and to have a discussion. Whereas if you're the loud, dislikable, screamy, shouty twat online or in real life, because some people are now taking this shit on tour, that is not gonna win anyone over, because the audience you're going to get are people that are already convinced anyway. And if you're not being a likeable, respectable person, if a no voter or a unionist or Tory, whatever else, people you have to convince, as much as you say they are the enemy, no, your job is to win them over. Your first port of call has to be, well, how are they going to perceive me? Do they want to hang out with me? Am I a cool, interesting person? You know, am I a likeable person? Am I a smart person? Am I reasonable? That's how you actually engage and then win people over and change minds, because you have to come across not a cunt.
Yeah.
You know, in order to do that. Whereas if you come across as a cunt, they're just going to go, well, all yes supporters must be cunts because you're a cunt. And that's all you've achieved. Whereas if you are a decent person, the association between decent person supporting Scottish independence, then we have a conversation to go. But that's something that is really, unfortunately, picking up momentum in a very toxic part of Twitter at the moment.
It is ultimately a small percentage of the population that is actually on Twitter, that is worrying about these things, that is talking about these things, and that the vast majority of people don't really give a fuck. And this small toxic band are really just talking amongst themselves. They're not persuading anybody other than each other. When a referendum comes again, and one will at some point, all the people who aren't very engaged at the moment will flood back in, and it will become a very, very much more interesting and plural place again, just like it was during the last referendum. Because that's what happened. People who weren't engaged came in.
I may have come across as very condescending in that previous rant.
No, I don't
Just say
think
that
so.
I'm
I
also
think there are
fully
some
aware
real
of
fucking
actually
twats out there.
how fucking meaningless my Twitter, this podcast, in the big picture is. We're not set up here going, we are the liberal elite of yes, and we're looking down at the little people. That's not what this is about. I'm fully aware that my opinion is just as meaningless as yours.
But I do take real fucking issue with, I mean, for instance, there's all sorts of things that you can criticise Dickie Leonard about. I mean, you know, mostly the fact that he's just a fucking moron. But the fact that he's English isn't one of them. And those people can fuck off, because this idea that Scotland is only for the Scottish, the people that were born here, go fuck yourself. That's everything that I fucking hate about
Trumpian
England.
They can fuck off, yeah. They can all fuck off.
Everything that I fucking complain about England and Britain and empire and all of that shit, they can go fuck themselves. Those people have no place in my fucking Scottish independence movement, and they can fucking shove their own heads up their arses.
I think we've all been pretty consistent in that, and like telling these people where to go.
Yeah.
This kind of like contingent of like, horribleness.
It's disappointing that there are a lot of SNP politicians that are definitely following, definitely interacting with, and liking shit that's fairly appalling from these people. particularly after things like the Richard Leonard comments that were made, incredibly blood and soil nationalism.
It's everything we fought against.
Yes.
It's what we were accused of, and it's everything we fucking fought against. I begin to worry about foreign interference in our politics. And you can think right back to IndieRef, when immediately after the referendum there were RT videos of what was going on in the count when there was the fire alarm and things like that, and there was an immediate action by them to try and create a sense that the result was invalid. That was a real early call on what was then going to happen.
Well, I think what's interesting about the RT Russian thing is that in the 2014 referendum, the Russians were on the yes side, as far as I could tell.
Yes.
Unsurprisingly, the breakup of the United Kingdom and the decommissioning of Trident would be something the Russians would quite like.
Yes.
What's fascinating to me is how now it seems like the Russians are actually trying to sabotage the yes movement with some of the more batshit nut stuff that's going out on the social media. And I believe that's because we
want to
pro-EU.
Yes.
So the Russians don't want the EU to be strengthened, and therefore now the sort of new administration that the Nicola Sturgeon regime is in, that are obviously incredibly globalist, massively pro-Europe, and that's the direction that Scotland's going in. Now suddenly you're seeing these incredibly blood and soil nationalist tweets, which never existed in 2014. And
so,
now it's become insular. And I'm wondering, is that happening? Is that,
yes,
are the Russians
I think it is.
influence?
And what I think is happening...
I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to go for a piss. But...
I noticed that Tommy Sheridan has got a column on Sputnik, which I hadn't realised before. I would have guessed that if I hadn't known,
But back to the RT thing, sorry, you were...
My hypothesis was that the Russians were pro-independence in 2014 because they wanted to break up the UK.
Yeah.
However, because Scotland has expressed interest in strengthening an even bigger union, which is the European Union, the Russians have now changed tack. So in 2014, they were for it. And the reason why a lot of cybernats are now banging on about blood and soil nationalism and taking the more Trump approach, as in the kind of mentality that fueled Brexit and the Trump election is now filtering into the common denominator, though, is that mindset, where it comes from, tends to be Russian memes and Russian social media content.
And I would agree with all that. So ultimately, Russia is interested in causing disruption in anything that looks like a kind of a hegemony anywhere else. I mean, for instance, in America, they are essentially behind a supposed Californian independence movement.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
The guy that runs it lives in Siberia or something mental like that. So they're always inserting themselves into these things. They are interested in disrupting global structures because that suits them. And the reason that they're interested in doing that is because they're actually piss poor. They have leached all the money out of their country. It's gone into private hands. The Russian people are fucking starving. Their economy is fucked.
What's fascinating about it, and that's an important point to note, the mentality that they put into the world is it's the most toxic, poisonous mentality you could ever have for humans. Because in the same way that Brexiters just want to smash the EU to bits, but the minute you go, right, okay, what's your alternative? There's never anything. Same thing with Trump. Oh, we voted Trump because we were sick of the system. All right, what's your alternative? Don't know. It's this constant thread that's throughout everything, and it's based off of that Russian, not Russians and the Russian people, but the Russian government mentality of, actually, we're a bit shit. In order to have any strength at all, we have to trash everybody else.
But
it's never about it's never about improving themselves.
It's always about weakening
bad.
The opponents, and because they don't have the military might. And because they don't have the financial clout, in terms of world economies, they're way down the list. But what they can do is cause disruption, and that is what they do. So they insert themselves into other countries' problems, and they'll play whatever side suits them in order to cause disruption and chaos. So, for instance, the Labour anti-Semitism thing. I don't think your average Labour voter is anti-Semitic. I don't think the Labour Party is fundamentally anti-Semitic. I think they stand pretty much on the exact opposite side of that argument. But I think what you get is, you get kind of bot activity whereby an artificially created little thing that starts, and then you get idiots. You get older people who are perhaps more likely to be a bit right-wing and conspiratorial, even if they're on the left, if you know what I mean. And they'll pick up on things and they don't understand what the underlying trope means. So if you start talking about globalists, Jewish people know what that means. If you talk about the international banking conspiracy, Jewish people fucking know what that means. But maybe you don't, and you've seen it, and you've seen something, and you share it, and you tweet it, and then it invigilates itself into your mentality. You don't realise that what you're actually saying is, well, the fucking Jews run everything, don't they? Right? You don't realise that, but you've shared it. But a Jewish person sees that, and they fucking know what that means. You don't know what you're saying, but they know what you're sharing. And that's the problem. And that's what's happening. It's happening in our movement. It's happening in America. It happened with Brexit. It's happening in the Labour Party. And it's happening everywhere. And the common fucking root thing is interference. I mean, if you want to look at an argument for having another people's vote, it's the fact that the first one was completely polluted by this.
Let's do a walkthrough example of what we're talking about just to get some clarity here. So, for example, if a Russian-run Twitter account puts out an image that is anti-banking, but with some anti-Semitic, subtle anti-Semitic imagery within it, if that Russian puts it out and then 50 bots retweet it,
yeah,
your idiot in question looks at it and goes, well, 50 people have shared this, it can't be anti-Semitic.
It doesn't even occur to them that it's anti-Semitic, because if you're not Jewish, that's not the first thing that you're thinking about. You know, it's not the first thing that's on my mind all the time.
What the Russians have mastered doing is seeing that people that are drawn towards politics kind of like the limelight. So they can make people little stars in their own little bubbles. So, well, they like that. If you post those images about the anti-banking stuff, that's gone over really well. Look how many likes that's got.
So
I'll start doing that.
Yeah,
so I get the shares.
Hate bankers. Do you know what I mean? I mean, for a while back in 2008 and 9 and 10 immediately afterwards, being a banker was like being a Nazi in a fucking Spielberg film, wasn't it? Do you know what I mean?
If you can give somebody that's gullible the impression that, well, if you share this kind of content, you can be popular, you know, and all these bots start liking and retweeting, oh, this is great, I must be onto something here. And then the next thing you know, there's not Russian involvement. They've just planted the seed.
Yes.
And boom, it's off. Because unless you've got people that are aware of their human weakness, of their ego wanting to be fed, and are aware of the fact that there is plenty of anti-Semitic tropes thrown completely in with the banking situation. Because, I mean, as you say, who doesn't hate bankers? Yes, we all hate bankers. But the problem is that when you're so close to falling into some of the old Jewish conspiracies from way back in the day.
For a long period of time, that was so far in history that you didn't really need to worry about it, and it wasn't being circulated, and it seems to have sort of bubbled back up.
I think that the boomer election problem, I don't mean to be ageist, but I'm going to be with this because the stats back it up. The reason why Trump got elected, Brexit happened, a lot of stuff, that boomers are basically
old people vote.
They're attracted to certain things. A lot of this conspiracy stuff, the banking conspiracy, and under the surface is the anti-Semitism. And then we're talking about Brexit. And even if you aren't a Tommy Robinson level racist, there's still that undercurrent of we don't like the immigrants. Boomers are drawn to a kind of warped fucking nostalgia. This is my theory on this.
We are the Village Green Preservation Society.
There's a feeling that back in the day, we could say these things, and those jokes were on TV. And I think these people are like nostalgic for Jim Davis and stand-up acts.
Yeah.
And I think the world that the boomers grew up in was so horrendous. they know actually objectively it was shit and horrible, but they're trapped by nostalgia. And as Hollywood has proven for the last 20 years, we just can't get enough of that fucking nostalgia injection.
Yep.
It's the member berries problem that South Park so accurately identified. You know, remember this, remember that, and it's like, we won't say it's the Jews, and we won't say, oh, but things were better before all those black people turned up. But it's there in the background, and it's tapping into that whole, I remember when this was all white. I remember this, remember that. The Russians have almost like weaponized nostalgia.
Do you remember when all
boomers.
the shops used to close at 6 o'clock and you couldn't get anything? Do you remember when everywhere was shut on a Sunday? Do you remember when? Do you remember when there was no NHS? Do you remember when we were...
And it's like, even though they're saying things like that actually were bad, remember this, even though it was objectively terrible and it's much better now, but because it's got that nostalgia thing to it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they've worked out in terms of how you manipulate with memes and tweets and so forth. It's if you just sprinkle the faintest trace of that nostalgia dust onto the most awful shit, the boomers fucking eat it up. They can't get enough of it. And they will do the stupidest things like elect Trump or vote Brexit. I mean, I love my mum. She fucking voted Brexit.
I love my mum. She
and
voted
she's a
Brexit.
very intelligent person. She's also in the SNP. Don't ask me to explain how the fuck that works. But yeah, and I think a lot of it is kind of driven by this. I remember the bread strikes. And you're going like, great, can we not do that again, please?
It'll always be the case that older people pine for this golden age that never actually existed. This
but I'm just going to
promised
say
land
it,
in their
right?
past.
I mean, I'm older than you two. I'm not actually old, but I'm substantially older than you two. I would fucking pine for the past. I remember it. It was shit.
I think that's.
I
want to
live to at least 100. I'm doing my very fucking best to make sure I stay fit and strong and healthy. If I have to fucking put my brain in a fucking glass jar so I carry on paying attention, I will.
We're not normal though. We're not normal people.
Nostalgia doesn't work for me at all. Like, I mean, I think look back at the 1990s and think like I would never want to go back. Like,
No.
as much as I look back and think,
I wish
boy,
I'd seen
that
the
was great.
Pixies live at the time when they were first going, and that's my only regret.
I mean, I don't want to go back to a world without smartphones. I don't want to go back to a
No.
world without the internet. Like, I don't want to go back to a world without equality and, you know, decent levels of human rights, which we've kind of clawed to the point where they're kind of reasonable-ish now.
And they're in reach.
And will
Yeah.
get better. If anything, like, I would always go forward. I want to make the next 10, 15,
I want
20
the
years the
spaceships.
best. Yes. What you think is advanced and progressive and the ultimate humanity is just the beginning of it. Actually, it's going to get better all the time. But you never go back. You don't go like, boy, wouldn't it be great to go back to the 1970s when things were simpler?
No.
But they were terrible. Like, they were
They weren't
objectively
great.
worse.
They weren't great if you were black. They weren't great if you were from Pakistani origin or something like that. They weren't great for anybody other than white guys. They weren't that great for a lot of them.
Yeah, and I don't understand where that insecurity comes from. Is it something about when you hit a certain age and maybe you haven't achieved what you dreamed of achieving when you were young, and then it's just like, fuck it, let's just become a bastard or whatever else it is? I don't know.
Well, I suppose the problem is that, you know, every generation unfurls itself, and every generation's a bit more socially liberal than the last one, and then it moves forward and it crystallizes over time. So we are dealing with people who are, for instance, 20 years older than me, but those people carry on voting based on the opinions that crystallized with them in their 20s.
The fact that the generations, as they go down, things get easier is the way that it should work. The thing that annoys me the most about the boomers is the resentment. Like,
That
they
yeah.
produced my fucking generation, and the utter resentment towards these kids don't work hard enough. Oh, it wasn't like this back in our day. Going, that's the point. It's human progress. Yes, it's easier. That's the idea of it. Like, who the fuck would have kids and go like, can you wait to make the world worse for these little fuckers? Like, I mean, that seems to be the kind of boomer mentality. It's like, we should go back to the days when we had bread strikes and there was no foreign integration and like all the women stayed in the fucking kitchen talking to the pub about how the Jews ran everything. I mean, why? I mean, I'm so grateful that I'm now in a situation where I can meet people that I want to hang out with. Because I can remember before the internet happened and being in school, I hated school, and you were just stuck with it. You had friends there that you were just there with because they were near you. Even though they were horrible, and you're like, I don't have anything in common with these people, this sucks. Whereas now, my generation have this amazing luxury to meet people online, befriend people that think in your way from all over the world, and you can meet and hang out. It's all these amazing love stories on Twitter. Someone from fucking Spain meets someone from Detroit or whatever else, and they got talking online, and the next thing you know, they're married. Of course, a boomer that didn't have any of that and just had to marry fucking Helen from down the street, even though he didn't really love her at all, but she was the best thing on the block, even though the block really wasn't that great to begin with. Yeah, you're going to be envious of this shit. In the same way that I'm going to be envious of the next generation. But I'm not going to be a cunt about it. Because the first generation where space travel was like air travel. To what the boomers had air travel, they were the first generation to grow up with planes. So that was a huge thing. There will be a generation, I may, touch wood, hopefully live to see it, a generation where space travel is that equivalent. That may happen. I'll be jealous of that.
Flight.
Because I reckon I'll be like 82 years old, and they'll probably do a fucking physio and go like, "Nah, you can't go into space. You're a fucking wreck." And I'll be looking at all the young kids shooting off into space and going, "Bastards." But I'm not going to be an arsehole about it, and that's the thing that I detest about the boomer generation. Well, one, the fact they fuck the economy. Secondly, they vote for Thatcher, Blair and Brexit and Trump. All that aside, there is the general kind of resentment that they have towards the fact that the youth have it easier, and the fact that they see that as a bad thing, I think is disgusting.
But the thing is, the youth don't have it easier. Their generation got free university and you were paid to go to university. I mean, I was kind of just on the tail end of getting a grant for university, but it was not enough to live off. And if you didn't have wealthy parents, and I didn't, you basically had to try and do your degree and keep a job down at the same time, or you starved to death. And for periods of time, I nearly fucking starved to death. Yeah. And you got a loan to sort of bump you up a little bit. Now it's all loans, and kids have got to put themselves in fucking hock, to massive amounts. The idea that kids have it easier is patently untrue. You got a free education if you were worthy of it. You got paid to go to university.
I didn't go to uni. I did 7 years in the military, and I'm now having to completely readjust to working in a procurement job that I've got no prior experience in.
I imagine.
And I do kind of resent being told that you don't work hard enough. I'm like, fuck you. And I hate the way too that they don't understand how, like, we have a cloud. We can all work from home. Like, I don't have to physically be in a fucking office, but that is never going to happen as long as the boomers are the managers, because the boomers think that it's not work unless you physically clock in and you are at a desk. Even though the bulk of what we do is based on phone calls, international emails, I could do that with a cup of tea here. Yeah. Why are you making me drive 80 minutes a day to get to an office to do what I can do now? But, well, that's too easy. That's too easy. Yes, because we've made it better. And it's that resentment of, that's not really work. I don't get that.
As I stand before the great black abyss of the void, I am reminded of the words of a great man who once said to me, "Son, we live a bit. We support Scottish independence. And then we die." And that's it. If you too believe in the credence of this great man, then you may wish to join nihilists for Scottish independence. Not only may you wish to join them, but you also may wish to purchase their merchandise, which can be bought now at teespring.com/stores/nihilists for indie. But if you don't, It doesn't matter. Nothing matters.